Good afternoon, everybody. This is Scott Winter with the Collaborative Commons, and today I have the privilege to introduce a relatively new but good friend, Laura Burgess from the Human Value Center. I met Laura through some collaborative work with some other folks and have spent some time getting to know her and meet with her and learn her vision of what she's trying to build. And I am excited to share what you know with the folks that we're doing within the Commons. So for those of people who are new to the Collaborative Commons, again, we're building a community of people who are doing work around collaboration, providing tools, resources, methods, models, and more importantly, relationships. So being able to have people like Laura in a network that you can have access to hopefully add value to your organization, your community, your school, and your life for that matter. So with that, Laura, again, thank you. And if you wouldn't mind, just start by sharing a little bit about who you are and how you came into the Human Value Center.
Sure, Scott. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me and for putting together the Collaborative Commons. I think it's such an extraordinary concept, and I truly believe that collaboration is the most essential value that we can have today to move forward. We've spent so many decades of me, and I, and in order to advance, we have to work together. And so thank you for bringing the community together. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Burgess, and I run the Human Value Center. We are a couple of years old. To give you a little bit of background, I've been in higher education and in nonprofit management all of my life, but primarily as a senior administrator in higher education. My PhD work is in human development, and my focus has been on post-adolescent, early adulthood development. And I had the luxury in my career, not only as a professor, but as an administrator, to build learning communities that foster holistic development in people. And that was really important to me early on because I'm a first-generation college student, and I am a second-generation high school graduate. So I come from, a family with some humble beginnings, and I really just thrived in education, and particularly in college, and just really felt badly that so many people didn't have those kinds of opportunities. So, early on, I got involved in looking at what is it that I love so much about this, and some of my, own reflective work. Why am I so jazzed about this when other people look at it as a chore? And I think at the end of the day, the core of it for me was helping people realize their full potential so that they can be in the greatest service to others. And that's how communities flourish. So while I spent about 25 years, with the luxury of building learning communities that, hopefully were helping individuals realize their full potential, I started looking at what are the qualities of a community or an organization that help make that happen. What is it about this particular classroom or this particular university versus others where people are saying, the experience is just okay, or seat time, if you will. And so just a lot of time in research and in practice, looking at the characteristics of, what's going to foster people feeling like they belong, that they like coming here. And as an administrator, of course, you have people who work there. And so what makes people happy at work and what makes people feel like versus, coming to work and it's a chore. And, of course, probably many people on this call think about organizational development and culture and what creates culture transformation in meaningful and positive ways. So after my first career, if you will, in higher education, really wanted to be able to bring that to others. And so we created the Human Value Center primarily to get at the root of behavior and what creates behavior change in positive ways. And we are a professional education in consulting and ed tech company. Really, we work primarily in the K-20 space. We do some work in the corporate space and are just getting into healthcare. And as you can imagine, health and human services are in need of a supportive and nurturing environment to keep our frontline workers supported.
Yes, I have a question. What did you experience in your K-20 experience or in your higher ed experience that just kind of created this aha that there was a need for the Human Value Center? I mean, was there a moment or whether there was an insight or a moment in time where you're like, holy cow, the world needs this? I'm curious because I can only imagine. I mean, I've done a lot of time in education, and I run across people that really inspired me to want to take on bigger
Wow.
challenges or bigger movements. And what you're working on is a pretty big movement. So was there a defining moment or set of moments for you?
Well, that's a tough question to answer. I will say that, for myself on a personal level, I was finding less and less joy in the job and in starting to look at the whys for that. Um, in part, I was feeling that I was surrounding myself with people who were so concerned with the outcomes and less concerned about the process. And we've become so externally driven that authenticity seemed to be hidden. And
Mm.
so the irony was just that here I'm all about holistic and honest and so forth, and just feeling like we had to hide that for some reason. And that trajectory just kept going up. And the more and more we started working with multiple organizations as consultants, just seeing this toxicity, and the toxicity seemed to be something that you couldn't just brush out the door. It was just becoming so consuming that it was hard to get rid of. And so working with a lot of people, frankly, a lot of people who had become disgruntled in their own workplaces, and bringing the Human Value Center is really a collective of scholars, practitioners, and people who can contribute to this space, but also people who've just had the experience of being in the field or being in the research and pulling the best of minds together to create ways to promote positive change, and to do so with continuing education, but doing so in tangible, real ways.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me some examples of some of the stuff and maybe even some of the projects that you are either working on now or be working on in the future that kind of, it demonstrates kind of the vision of what the Human Value Center and the work that you're doing can
Sure,
eventually
sure.
become? Yeah.
So I think something else that helped shape the courage really to build the Human Value Center is I got involved with the Charter for Compassion International, which is a global nonprofit. It was started 10 years ago by a woman named Karen Armstrong, who won a TED Prize for her talk on compassion. And she came up on the radar after 9/11 because of her expertise in world religions. And she was talking about some of the common themes or threads in all of the world religions about, treating people the way you'd want to be treated, and the golden rule and so forth. And I was doing some consulting work with them. And that's a really interesting concept, compassion, how to become compassionate. And it exploded overnight. And there are about 350 cities globally that have signed a resolution with their local city governments about becoming a compassionate city. And so one of the tipping points for us was, well, what does it mean to be a compassionate city? Just because you sign up to say, hey, that sounds good, let's be compassionate. What does compassion look like? What does compassion mean? And so we started working with local city governments. And one great example is I live in Southern California, outside of LA here, in a community called Pomona, California. About 250,000 people became a compassionate city. And the city council passed a resolution, we're compassionate, but again, okay, so what is that, and what does that look like, and what does that mean? I gave them a lot of credit because it's courageous to say we could do better. We've met with lots of cities who said, hey, we are compassionate, we're a great city, and we've always done great things. And that a lot of that is politics talking, and in fear talking. So we pulled together, this was really a fun project that really sealed it for me, that we need to do more of this kind of work. We pulled together 75 leaders from all the major sectors of Pomona. We had the chief of police, fire, first responders, the healthcare system, the universities, public education, private education, city government, nonprofits, and faith organizations, as well as residents.
Wow.
And we brought together 75 leaders for a 2-day workshop. So for those of you who do this kind of work, with leadership development and so forth, you can imagine, the folks who know each other sitting over here. So you're all the government people over here and the teachers over here. And we began by really exploring personal values. And what's great about using values is it doesn't politicize. We all have our own values. They may be mirrored or couched in different language, but at the end of the day, at the core of who we are, we all have some common human values. It's interesting, if you, I work with an organization called the Barrett Value Center out of the UK, and in fact, we use one of their tools And we actually have a free personal values assessment on our website if anyone would like to check it out. It's a really great resource. But what it does is it spans 7 levels of consciousness, if you will. And it's really taking Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from survival and relationships and self-esteem on up to transformation and making a difference and, getting to compassion. So when people are struggling with, I don't even have money to put food on the table or a roof over my head, it's really hard to ask them to be compassionate because they don't have their basic needs met. Barrett did a study between Republicans and Democrats recently in the United States about their values. And interestingly, 9 out of the 10 top values, they weren't in the same order, but 9 out of the 10 were the same values.
Can you give me, do you have some examples of where the similarities are? I'm assuming family would be, is that a value that you would be saying, or what were some of the?
Yeah, family, friends, fun, financial security, safety, opportunity, freedom. Those were the kinds of values that came through. And the only difference between the Republicans and the Democrats is one had integrity and the other had opportunity. It was, it's really interesting to think, wow, if we're 95% there on meeting each other in the exact same way, why is it that we have so much polarization? So getting back to the charter, or to the city of Pomona, it created a level playing ground to start dialogue with people who were otherwise fighting over resources and having disconnects, a lot of silos, and a lot of overlap and replication of activities taking place. This group is working on homelessness, and this group is dealing with the mental health of the homeless, and this group is dealing with, drug addictions with the homelessness. It's like, why aren't we all working together? We're all talking to the same group. We're all having the same struggles. Right. So it was really great. We did that 2-day workshop, and then with my company and doing blended learning, we brought them into an online community so they could stay together for 3 months and continue, not just saying, hey, that was a great 2 days, because we know that once you leave, you're going to lose so much of that and maybe come out of it with 1 or 2 nuggets. And also, how do you stay connected? So we did a 3-month program. They all earned a compassionate leadership certificate as a result of that, but an action-oriented projects where they came together to work together. In this case of Pomona, homelessness was the topic of the day, and they were able to do monumental things that they never would have been able to do together as just one agency or another. And they were able to get a tremendous amount of policy change in the city. And it's interesting now that I've stepped away from the project as a hands-on guide, it's absolutely flourishing. And a big part of that is because of the trust that was built and the relationship-centered work that took place.
Well, I think it's what a great case study, because, I live in Northern California, and, homelessness is a topic. And I don't necessarily like that term. It's like people who are not living in homes, unfortunately, and the infrastructure because of mental health and all kinds of challenges. And it's really they create this us and them kind of dynamic. And I think of the costs that are associated to that. Whereas if you think about the byproduct, not only are the team, is that community come together, but I think about it, things are getting done more quickly. There's a lot less money being spent. They're utilizing their resources. I mean, the byproduct, it'd be really interesting to see the measure of effectiveness that they probably hadn't anticipated in that 2-day session, but to see it realized is huge. So what a great example.
So what we're trying to do now is really take that kind of work, Scott, and replicate that model while recognizing that every single community has localized challenges, different personalities, and so forth. But what are the common pieces of that can be replicated? Because to my point earlier, what does it mean to be a compassionate city? We have people all over the world that are looking to do that. So if we can, through the Charter for Compassion and nonprofits, say, here are the ingredients, here's sort of compassionate cities in a box of steps to take to work together, teaching people the skills of the soft skills, right? Mindfulness, dialogue, collaboration, and change making are soft skills that we've just as a society have neglected for a long time. Right. And so it's learning some things that are probably innate to us.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now called Teaming, and it's a woman, Dr. Tamsin Woolley, I believe is her last name, Barker Woolley, and she is doing what's called biomimicry. work, where she takes and studies, she's an anthropologist and a biologist, and she's looking at, communities of ants and, termites and monkeys. And, she makes this assimilation or this association between the human and our ability to collaborate, and how ants and bees, and it's really just fascinating. She's got, she goes, if you just look at how the natural world works, where you don't see ants put stuff in their soils that will kill them, but you don't see bees put in the air where they can't breathe. It's like you just don't see this kind of behavior. And so he goes, there's a lot that we can learn from this, but I think there's also a lot that we can learn from each other when we have examples like Pomona to say, hey, what does it take to really do the best for our community? And how? So I'd just be curious to know, in that 2-day period, at what point, because again, it takes time to build that trust. What was there, were you a part of that moment where things just kind of shifted for the group, where they guys, this is what it means to be a compassionate city in terms of their own definition, like they imagine they've been a part of creating it, but was there a particular window of time that it took them to kind of figure out that, man, when we come together?
To be honest with you, I don't think it happened in the first 2 days. I think people left saying this was great, and we're just like, we want more of this. This is, I'm just starting to let my hair down. I really like this. And the 2 days were over. But fortunately, because of using a learning management system where people can have ongoing dialogue, real time or asynchronistically, having time just to go back and reflect and think about things too. So many of us have those moments where we say, oh, I wish I said this, or I didn't think about this part. But so giving them the chance to stay connected, and also having people roll up their sleeves and work together. I think once people saw that when they saw their colleagues, their fellows also committed, then that trust was built. Otherwise, there were such hierarchical challenges. I mean, we had people in the room who were undocumented immigrants, whose daily work was housekeeping, sitting side by side with the chief of police and the city manager. So there wasn't a lot of trust in the room in the beginning. Frankly, I thought it took a lot of courage for folks to even to be there. So it's hard to say there was this particular moment. But I will say, in another example, we've worked with a university in Southern California. Trust was one of the biggest challenges because the institution had gone through a couple of years worth of really high profile criminal investigations that, folks got slaps on the wrist, crimes were reported, and again, we just heard the same kind of thing, a lot of cover-ups and so forth. And once this came out, students didn't trust the administrators, faculty, there's just so much division. And that's an organizational structure that's already got tremendous power and privilege with titles and ranks. It's a caste system in so many ways. Even when we have undergraduate students and graduate students and adjunct faculty and real professors, I mean, it's just, it's a tough place. But when we were able to do a series of values assessments and coming together in town halls and reflective work, there came a time when the group could agree to what are the 5 things we care about most that we really want to exemplify in our own personal lives and have that personal accountability. That's when transformation started to take place.
2 things that kind of pop up for me as you're talking. So, doing this work in the neuroscience space, and we talk a lot about how neuroplasticity in terms of changing the way the brain operates, for example, and it happens through experience, but more importantly, it happens from the reflections from those experiences when people are making sense of. And I can only imagine that 2-day, and then having that follow-on allowed people, as you were mentioning, that time to reflect and really to think about how am I showing up. In the work we do within the Commons, we talk a lot about how collaboration, the extension of collaboration, is this idea of conscious co-creation. It's to say, how am I showing up, and am I contributing or taking away through my perspective or through my participation? And I can only imagine when you talk about that last example, where when you ask the question, what are the 5 most important things that we care about, and everyone kind of coming on board and really reflecting on, this are the things that are most important to us. We always say that flow follows focus, and to have that kind of focus with a diverse team, like with all the different players, that's power. Are there some conditions that need to be set? I mean, what are some of the priming work that you do for groups? Because we're in the middle of this pandemic. There's a lot of communities that I think are starting to see where the systems are broken within their own communities, whether it be in the healthcare or in the mental health or whatever. I mean, we definitely are stretching ourselves really thin because we haven't been collaborating as effectively in the past. So I'm just curious to know, like, in order for the compassionate city or collaborative community to really mobilize, and I'm hoping that we're not just mobilizing around a crisis, that we can actually sustain this mobilization. So it does become, I think I was sharing before our recording is that people keep talking about, the new normal. And I really want to be striving towards the new optimal, like the work that you're doing. I mean, what an optimal situation that the city of Pomona is probably pretty resilient and probably pretty ready for a pandemic because of the level of collaboration that you've established. So I think it's amazing, but I just be curious, are there conditions, I mean, trust is there, but in that 2-day experience, I mean, getting them to talk, what would you say are kind of the ecology or the environment that needs to be there for that seed of compassion to really grow in these towns or communities or organizations?
Well, I think there needs to be, it's a tough question to answer, but I think you're right. Pomona is so resilient and they've become a model for dozens and dozens of cities out here in Southern California as well. I think once you're able to satisfy your basic needs and people are able to start taking care of themselves, it's really hard to care for others if you don't care for yourself.
Right.
And that may be stating the obvious, but when we think about COVID, I don't know about you, but I see so many silver linings, Scott, in this situation. I see people taking time to be friendlier to one another, to offer a hand to others, to check in with others. And it's like, gosh, why weren't we doing this before? I think it would be hard to go back because it becomes relationship centered. And I just firmly believe, as humans, we are meant to be a tribe. We are meant to be together.
Right.
And so, in terms of the conditions, I actually think this is a great recalibration for us, with all due respect to everyone who's suffering and dying from this. But it's an opportunity for us to look at, our humanity and what brings out the best in humanity. And it's conditions that allow for communication. Right. And so I think and that's where we have to address isolation. So when you see, communities, for example, I belong to a parish where it's like, there's phone trees checking in on the elderly and so forth. And guess what? That fuels the individuals who are doing the service. And so, it's about the individual, it's about the collective, but when you are part of service, it elevates you and now you're able to give more and you're at this higher level. So I think unless you're challenged with something new, you're taking it up a notch. It's really hard to pull back from that, nor would you want to, because it creates so much joy.
Right. So on that note, you talked earlier about the compassionate communities and, the idea that there's is there a doctrine or there a set of principles that the compassionate communities operate under? Like, what are the operating or driving principles or values of compassionate communities? If it's a movement, what are the 3 to 5 things that are really important if the community is like, hey, this sounds interesting, or even my organization, because it's not just it's not just exclusive to communities. I mean, I can imagine it could be for a school district or for a company.
Right. Well, if I could make a plug for the charter, I would encourage anyone who listens to the podcast, Scott, to go to the charterforcompassion.org website. There are about 45 world leaders who contributed to this language. And I would be remiss to even try to paraphrase what's stated in it. I mean, a lot of, we're partners with the UN and others, talking about basic human rights and inalienable rights and so forth, but how we behave with one another. And it's like kind of interesting. The request from the charter as a nonprofit is for you to just sign up, just not to pay for anything, but just to say, I'm going to join, I'm going to pledge to live this way as well. And just making that pledge can make such a difference. And in different pieces, we'll speak to other individuals. So I don't want to steal the thunder from the charter by speaking to the principals or tenants, nor do I want to fumble through them.
Yeah, it was a memory test that I don't want to fail in front of all these people. And that's fine. Well, but I think it's, again, I just really have been fortunate and blessed to, have met you this last year and to feel like we're working on some cool stuff. And I just think it's so critical to be able to work with people like yourself who are kind of, self-aware and mindful enough to know that, hey, if we're going to be collaborative, we have to be really, to your point, be self-aware enough to know that if I am, because, I do a lot of work with the radical collaboration and some other work. And, that idea of, if I'm getting threatened or defensive, it's not you, it's me, right? And to be willing to explore that in your presence, rather than like, Laura makes me feel this way. It's like, no, I don't, I
Yeah.
feel this. And it's been really interesting, again, because of this pandemic, to your point earlier, it's like, why does it take a crisis for humanity to show up? And 9/11, we had the same kind of dynamic where people came together and we had this kind of, one mindset as a collective. And then it quickly deteriorated because of the politic. And I remember,
It's interesting you say that, Scott. You're just reminding me. I was working with the city of Dallas, and someone had asked in a session once, how can we get people to be more compassionate? Why don't we have more people around the table? What's it going to take? And I said, a tragedy.
yeah,
And sure enough, there was a situation that involved police and people getting killed and a shootout. And what happens is everyone from the community comes out together because they're mourning together. They want to make change together. But we don't want to have to wait for tragedy.
right,
So
exactly. Yeah. And well, it's interesting to me because I've done, a lot of similar work as to you in terms of community development. I was in a small community where there was a drive-by shooting during the day, and the communities just went up in arms. And so they'd asked for me to facilitate this community forum, and they're like, yeah, there might be 70 people. Over 300 people showed up to this thing, and they wanted to lynch the sheriff. I mean, they were really angry. And, I'd heard things, the city manager said some things, or not the city manager, but the mayor of the city said some things. And I'm like, don't let that get out in public, because that was a stupid thing you said. But what was so interesting was when we came together, and to your point, just getting them talking and having a sense of direction, start to say what's really important to them. It was really amazing. And they created a whole graying task force. They really worked, but it was so fascinating because, again, it took a crisis for that dynamic to pop. And I am wanting to get to a point where, how do we keep movement going? And another story aside of that, because of the community development work I've done, I remember I was doing some work in a town where they had some political consultants in the community. And I was invited to this meeting, and some of the political consultants were in the room, and they were addressing some dynamics in the city. And at one point we took a break, and the consultant came up to me and asked me what I did for a living. I said, my name is Scott Winter, and I work to bring people together. And he just snickered at me, and he goes, I do the exact opposite. It was profound for me to hear this, like this idea, who's a consultant for a political group. And it doesn't really matter, because whether you're on the left or right, I think they're all wired the same way. But his whole politic was to divide and conquer, because if I can create divisions, and then I can create fear of other, then I can actually do fundraising to support my cause, right? Versus, wait a minute, that seems really stupid to me. Why aren't we really kind of saying, hey, let's solve the issue of, homelessness or the environment, and not make it a, business is bad, environmentalists are good, or environmentalists are bad and businesses are good. We got to get out of this polarity type of thinking, and really start to understand and listen to one another rather than argue. And so, are there any tips that you use as a facilitator when you are confronted with some of these kind of polar dynamics at times? I mean, what are some tools that you lean on, or practices that you lean on, when you are confronted with some of the hostility that sometimes could probably surface in these conversations?
So we use something called restorative practices, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with restorative practices?
Vaguely.
Yeah, so it really gets to the soft skills of bringing people together, letting people be heard, and voicing what happens. So for example, let's say an individual comes and grabs my handbag and robs me.
Mm-hmm.
They figure, oh, she's got insurance, and she looks rich, I needed this. But maybe didn't know that my mom's medication was in my bag. Now my mom's got to go to the hospital, and she dies, and now I'm grief stricken. So you bring people together and get back to those those soft skills about dialogue. Restorative practices, and there's a great organization called the International Institute of Restorative Practices, IIRP.org, and they offer lots and lots of great courses and webinars and things like that talk about these practices. We're just starting to bring them into schools, which is really important. And I'll give you a great example. Our own local high school where my son goes to school had a situation pre-COVID, but this spring, where a Syrian kid, there was a Syrian boy who was a new refugee in town who was socially, what was the term I'm looking for? On social media, there was another kid who was bullying him, picking on him and ostracizing him. And they ended up planning an after-school fist fight. The Syrian boy brought 4 other Syrian boys versus this other American kid. So because it was more than 4 children, it was considered another level of crime. So the principal's office called the police. The kids were all arrested. Now they have to go to court over this. They've got a permanent record. Now the immigrant children are going to have a real challenge getting their permanent residency. And, you know, what a way to be welcome into the country. And then, by the way, the kid who was doing the bullying was a foster kid who was troubled youth and in and out of multiple homes. And, you know, they're all hurting. They're all hurting.
Right.
And, you know, and we're going to just throw them into the juvie system. So, you know, we wanted to introduce social restorative practices because this was an opportunity for them to, you know, just sit down and listen, to get what's off your chest that's hurting you, and you know, become friends, you know, and that's what's happening now. We were able to intervene with that. You know, unfortunately, the records are what they are, but at least we were able to restore some relationships there. Right. But anyway, that is one way, but really being able to be heard and creating, you know, some ground rules for what the community will look like. We did a lot of things like this post 9/11, and that shares my age, but I was with Arizona State University at the time, and in Arizona we had, you know, Sikhs being killed in gas stations because they were wearing, you know, their religious garb, and, you know, people's ignorance. You know, we had a lot of polarization just between different ethnic groups and racial groups on campus. So creating what we called intergroup relations, bringing different groups together to sit down, to understand one another, to be heard, and then to find the commonalities. And I think it's finding those common grounds. When you break bread or have a beer together, it's really hard to shoot one another.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because we talk about that we have this framework that Dan Radecki and Melanie Hull shared around the safety model related to the brain, and it's, you know, security, which is the brain's need for certainty, predictability, autonomy, fairness, esteem, and trust, which is in-group, out-group. And I find it interesting how it's, in terms of creating a divisive culture, what I will do is I will, you know, say it's this particular culture. So I create a them dynamic, right? And then I say, well, and they are doing these things to you, which activates the unfairness, which then activates the disgust network in the brain, which then when that happens, all bets are off in terms of anything irrational around a behavior. And I see that in our rhetoric in our country, where immediately the easy thing to do, instead of just in the collaborative work that, you know, I do, and it sounds very similar, that look, no one's to blame here, but we're all accountable, right? We're all culpable in this dynamic. And so what role can I play? And I really love the fact that you've been proactive in not only yourself by seeing a gap and filling it, but also teaching other people how to close that gap as well, that they're not, you know, no one's to blame. We're all accountable, but we need the skills to be able to have these types of conversations, and be aware enough to know that, again, if I'm frustrated or fearful of you, it's not you, it's how I feel about myself when I'm in your presence. And getting people to own that part of the equation, that takes time, that takes effort, and that takes a muscle. And I think your word that you started earlier.
You pulled that right out of my brain. I was going to say that as well, because as soon as we start putting ourselves in the victim, you made me, you know, you did this to me, you made this happen, I'm the victim. As soon as you get into that victim mentality, you've got to be able to reframe. So even just that awareness, like hearing yourself and how you think about things, because our thoughts perpetuate and really draw. If we're living in fear, we're going to draw more fear.
Right. Well, there are some really interesting studies related to the neuroscience and embodied cognition, how it's the brain-body energy outlet. So, for example, your brain will give your body enough energy to that it needs to get over a particular challenge. But the data that your brain is using is based upon the past experience, right? So let's say I had a bad experience with Laura from the Human Value Center, right? And I have to go to a meeting to her. Well, my brain's going to give me the energy that I need to, survive versus, well, wait a minute, how do I want to reappraise that? Or how can I, like, giving the brain and the body the ability to kind of have an experience. And I think I shared with you that there is some really cool technology with virtual stuff where people can actually learn empathy and, do that in a very quick way. And I think that, the space that you create, or it sounds like you create for these communities, is part of the experience of opening people up to a new way of not just doing, but I think being. And I'm just be curious, like, what have been some of the testimonials from people who maybe have been resistant in the front end, and now all of a sudden, like, they're your biggest raving fans?
Oh, it's so rewarding, and it's so great to have that happen. And that's why the Human Value Center doesn't do any marketing or anything like that, because this is a snowball. People are hungry for this. People want meaning and purpose. People want to get along. People want to see progress. I mean, when you're familiar with the EdTech app that we use,
right.
And it's about feeling valued, which means being heard and being seen, connecting with others, recognizing that you're contributing, you're part of a greater cause,
Right.
And that you're growing, and that you're evolving, and there's meaning to your life. You're constantly changing. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what industry we work in, whether we're in the corporate sector or government or healthcare or education, or whether you're 10 years old or 60 years old. This really matters. And that, that's important when you think about our older generation too, because what happens after people retire, if they don't fill those gaps with something where they feel valued, feel connected, feel that they're contributing, feeling that they're growing, what happens? They die, right? People shrivel
Right.
up, and you see that atrophy take place. So whenever we can create environments, I call it learning communities, but whatever that collaborative community is, where everyone can be engaged at a level of comfort, you're going to see that happen, and that's where people flourish. There's another organization. You brought up the virtual reality. So we use things like apps, and I can't wait until we can start offering that virtual reality where you can literally walk in another person's shoes, right? And know what that feels like. But there's another collaborative group that folks should know about, and it is called Transformative Technology out of Stanford. And Scott, I'll forward you their website if I didn't get the name 100% right. Transformative Technologies. And this is an emerging group of leaders who are really looking at neuroscience and technology and using it to foster the best that humanity has to bring.
Yeah. I do think that there is going to be some really cool technologies out there, because I think, again, I'm wearing the Aura Ring, right? I just got this, and it reads your it's like your biofeedback, heart rate variability, your sleep, and so I'm really cognizant of, like, what I put in my body that day. Does it impact my dream? Like, I just started an antihistamine, and my deep sleep just went to crap. So I'm just kind of making that awareness in terms of just these little knobs, because I'm not these little life choices that we're making to just kind of improve the quality, because if I have a good night's sleep, then I'm more effective through the next day. And just I'm taking it to that level, because I do think that what's in front of us as a result of this pandemic, it's going to require people like you and myself and other people within the Collaborative Commons to show up in a not necessarily in a different way, but a more intentional way, with hopefully some clarity. And I guess I would love to, in kind of just as we start to wind this conversation down, is to hear from you bits of advice, because I've been talking with a community of folks that I kind of grew up with in the collaboration space, and we've been meeting monthly and talking about, what could we be doing and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that really resonates with me, at least kind of my lens, has been being really mindful of, in this situation, where can I shine a light of hope for myself and others? Where can I shine a light around being helpful, and how can other people find a place where they can be helpful? And the idea of finding meaning in it all as well. And I was interviewing Peter Diaz and Emmy Golding on a couple sessions ago on mental pillars of mental wealth. And I just recall sharing with Peter that, my big epiphany is like feeling helpless is the biggest cause of stress in the human body. It's in terms of our nervous system. And he goes, well, it's being helpless and hopeless. And then I was asked to do a course on dealing with, these existential crisis, right? And so I was doing some research and reading different, Fromm and other different psychologists, and another word show up. So it was the helpless, hopeless, and then meaninglessness leads to stress. And so it just seems like in the work that you're doing, you're creating a sense of hope. People are finding a place where they can be helpful, and through it all, they're creating new meaning for their community. And I couldn't think of a better formula for doing that. And it seems that so two questions. And I know I go off on tangents here at times. So the one question that I'll start with is, what sort of advice do you have for people like me who are trying to find out where to be helpful, where to put hope, where to find meaning in building community, in collaborative learning communities? What would be some advice? Because I think it's easy for us to get caught up in being, kind of getting burned out in our own compassion, if you will. I think it is called compassion burnout, if you will. How do you create the lines? What kind of advice would you give to people like us who want to just give and help and support and build without losing themselves in it? And I think especially in this pandemic situation where people are trying to find the meaning. So any bits of advice?
Yeah, that's something that comes up in a lot of leadership conversations, right? That, givers and we need to do more, but then we neglect ourselves and we have that burnout. And well, one thing I would say is do a personal values assessment, because a lot of times you'll see like, oh, I'm so up here, trying to make the world a better place, and I have neglected myself. So, I think when we talk about the personal awareness piece, there's an author named Wayne Muller who I love, and one of his books is called How Then Shall We Live? And there's really 4 big questions that he talks about. Who am I? What do I love? What are my gifts? And how do I share them with the world? And I think if you sit down, and whether you do that in sort of a reflective way or a journaling way, I love to bring this with students and have them, artistically, and it's kind of fun to do, get out some crayons or markers or something and kind of draw out, who am I? And just who am I really? Because if you honor your truth, then you're not going to get sidetracked with so many other things. The other piece is to be more of an observant witness to what's going around. And I think where you can make a difference will show up. I really believe that. So rather than saying, gosh, there's this pandemic going on, what can I do? I could start sewing masks. I could be shipping them to people. I could be running to the food bank. The opportunities where help is needed will show up. So just be an observant witness around you, and the opportunities will be there. So don't worry so much about it. It'll be there, but if you're taking care of yourself, that balance will come. It's just like the biorhythms of our sleep, and riding with the waves. I was telling my daughter the other day, you don't have to be the surfer out there, fighting the waves and struggling. Just go with the waves. Right. So don't think too hard, but of course the boundaries that we all need. The practices that we take care of ourselves. I know you have some rituals. Having rituals for self, having rituals for family. Whatever those may look like, can create some structure. But the more you're in tune to yourself, the more you'll start to recognize whether or not you have an Oura ring. You'll start to hear and feel the different things, but being mindful of, your intellect, your mind, of course, but your social self, your emotional self, your spiritual self, and by that, whatever that means to you, whatever is profound and meaningful and purposeful, and your physical self, and so taking care of ourselves. If we're doing that, and what do I do?
Yeah, what are some of your practices?
I practice 2 days a week, 2 times a day. I do a 20-minute meditation, and I'm a big believer in sky meditation. I have a very active brain, and I take in a lot of caffeine. So I've tried 10 different meditative practices, because I hear the testimonials. It's like I want that, and I found that sky meditation, which is breath-based and physiologically, results happen. And so I do that about 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon. I'm really protective of my sleep time. So if my spouse is like, well, let's just stay up and watch one more episode of blah, blah, blah. I said, nope, this is my bedtime. I'm taking care of myself so that I can take care of other people.
Right.
And I love to cook. So, trying to fuel your hobbies, I get to do that every day because it happens to be a hobby that people can enjoy. But I think that those kinds of things are important. And I'm a goal setter, so I like to give myself challenges. If I do my workout or my yoga, in June, I'll reward myself, and that
Yeah.
gamification works for me.
Totally works. There's the thing that's been really interesting in practice. So in this course I've been doing with Damon, there's two things that we've been highlighting. One is just this idea of make the small things big. And what he means by that, or what we mean by that is, when I make dinner, I just slow down and I make dinner. So I can make chopping of onion really just thoughtful and methodical and precise thin layers. I mean, I'm just slowing down because I don't have a lot of stuff on my calendar. I mean, I do, but I don't. I mean, I'm in control, and it's so amazing how just by making small things big, like just being in the moment in these tasks, like cleaning my bathroom over the weekend, and just like being meticulous about just being present with cleaning the floorboards and stuff. It was really amazing to see
Come on
how
over to my place.
oh, it's unbelievable. But like just that whole idea, that practice of just
Yeah.
small things big has been really good. And just the breathing has been massive as well for the people that we've been doing it with.
Yeah.
We start every meeting with a 5-5-6, which is, count of 5 in, count of 5 out. And we do it 6 times. And the studies show how you can get into the same rhythm pretty quickly from a neurobiological perspective. So we're just trying to help people understand their nervous systems through this process. It's been pretty cool.
One of the rituals that I forgot to mention too is I like to watch the sunrise every morning. And I'm an early riser because I go to bed early. And being outside rather than starting to run through my day, with the shutdown, I've been, I'm not a gardener, but I've been, trimming some of the flowers and bringing them in the house, and just, it's like appreciating things. So that's why I really feel like this can be a joyful time if we're present and mindful of every second section that we're in here.
Yeah. So if people are interested in reaching out to you, how can they get a hold of you? What's the website? And I wrote down some notes. I'll be getting from you kind of clips that I can put on the show notes for people, but what's the way they can reach out to the Human Value Center? What's the website?
So our website is hvc-world.org. That stands for Human Value Center, -world.org. And my email is just Laura@.
Okay.
Same thing. And I'm happy to give my phone number out, 480-227-1366. I'm such a big believer in collaboration. I love what you've put together and Joseph have done here. So anything that I can do, whether it's helping refer people or looking at one model and how it applies to another industry or another setting, I think that's where innovation comes from. And I think we've seen that, we've learned so much from the tech industry and how to apply that to more antiquated situations. So, this is something that's on fire. So let's keep it going.
I really do. And I really do hope that some communities reach out to you as they reflect on how they're going to bounce back, again, not to a new normal, but to a new optimal on the other side of this pandemic. Because again, even though we're physically isolated, I think we have to be connecting in different, more meaningful ways. And I think that's what I really am grateful for you and your organization and the people that I've got to meet on your team. I just think I'm just really excited as to where we're going. And I think hopefully as a result of the collective energy that we bring to today's challenges, that we can help those who are struggling a little bit more with a little bit more compassion, and hopefully enroll them into the work of helping others as well. I mean, I'm excited. I'm inspired. I'm also, to your point, humbled and also horrified in seeing some of the pain and suffering that's going on. Knowing that a lot of it could be prevented if we could just work together. That's the key for me. So,
you're a terrific person, Scott. You're a special soul, and I'm really grateful for whatever has brought you to this point to be bringing people together in such a meaningful way. So thank you.
Thanks.